The sun was just climbing over the horizon when old Mr. Thompson woke up that Monday. Today was the day. He'd waited too long already. His bones ached as he got out of bed, but a fire burned in his chest that no amount of years could put out. Justice was long overdue. He pulled on his faded blue overalls, the same ones he'd worn nearly every day for the past decade. His flannel shirt had patches on the elbows, but it was clean and pressed. He didn't have much, but what he had, he took care of. After a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, he walked to his shed out back. There it was, waiting for him in the corner, a large burlap stack filled with papers he'd been collecting for years. Papers nobody thought mattered. Papers nobody had bothered to read. The bus ride into town took 30 minutes. He clutched the sack on his lap, nodding politely to the driver who'd seen him hundreds of times, but never really noticed him. That was the story of his life, being invisible despite being right there in plain sight. First National Bank of Millfield stood tall and proud in the center of town, all glass and polished stone. It was the busiest time of day, with people rushing to deposit checks before work or waiting in line for the ATM. The security guard at the door gave Mr. Thompson a quick glance but didn't stop him. Just another old-timer coming to deposit his pension check, he figured. Inside, the cool air hit him like a wall. Fancy lights hung from high ceilings, and the floor was so shiny you could almost sit your face in it. The bank looked nothing like it had when he first started working there as a night cleaner all those years ago. Back then, it was a humble building with wooden counters and a single safe. Now, it was all modern and cold, with people talking fast and tapping on screens. "Can I help you find something?" asked a young woman at the help desk, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She wore a blue blazer with the bank's shiny logo pin, her hair pulled back tight. "I'm here to see whoever's in charge," Mr. Thompson said, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. "Do you have an appointment?" She glanced at his dirty work boots and the strange sack he carried, then at the growing line of people behind him. "No, but they'll want to see me. This is important business." He patted the sack gently. She picked up her phone and pressed a button, speaking quietly while eyeing him with growing suspicion. A minute later, a tall man in an expensive suit appeared. "I'm Bill Jenkins, the branch manager. How can I help you today?" His tone was polite but hurried. Mr. Thompson looked him straight in the eye. "My name is Harold Thompson. My grandfather owned this land, and according to these papers, this bank building belongs to me." A moment of silence fell before someone in line coughed, trying not to laugh. The manager's smile stretched wider, but his eyes narrowed. "Sir, perhaps we should talk in my office." He gestured toward a hallway, clearly hoping to remove the odd old man from public view before he caused a scene. "That would be fine," Mr. Thompson agreed, holding his sack closer. "But you should know, I'm not leaving until someone looks at these papers proper. I've been ignored for too long." As he followed the manager down the hallway, he could hear the whispers starting behind him. Let them laugh, he thought. They wouldn't be laughing for long. Mr. Jenkins led old Thompson down a hallway lined with framed photos of bank presidents past and present. The old man noticed how they all wore the same confident smile, like they owned the world. Well, maybe they didn't own quite as much as they thought. "Right this way," said Jenkins, opening the door to a small conference room. It wasn't his main office that was reserved for important clients. This room was where they handled problems. The chairs were comfortable enough, but Thompson stayed upright, his hands resting on his sack. "I'd prefer to stand, if you don't mind. That gets stiff when I sit too long." Jenkins checked his watch. "Mr. Thompson, we're very busy today. How can we resolve this quickly?" "Ain't nothing quick about waiting 60 years for justice," Thompson replied. "But I'll show you what I got." With careful hands that shook just slightly, he opened his burlap sack. Inside were stacks of papers, wrapped in plastic to protect them from damp. Some were yellowed with age, the edges crumbling despite his care. There were old black and white photographs showing a farmhouse and vast fields, and most importantly, several official-looking documents with faded red seals. "This here's the original deed," Thompson said, gently placing it on the table. "My grandpa's farm covered 120 acres, including this very spot we're standing on." Jenkins picked up the paper between two fingers like it might be dirty. He barely glanced at it before setting it down again. Mr. Thompson, I appreciate you coming in, but whatever claim you think you have is surely expired by now. Property law has statutes of limitations, you understand. Not when the lease had special conditions that were never met. Thompson countered, pulling out another document. This here says the bank only had rights to build if they maintained the original facade and paid a percentage to my family every year for 50 years. They stopped paying after just 15. Jenkins sighed, leaning back in his chair. These documents are ancient history. The bank has changed hands several times since then. Whatever arrangements might have existed with the original owners aren't binding today. The law says different. Thompson insisted, tapping the paper with a weathered finger. My daddy tried to follow up back in '72, but nobody would listen. I got the letters he sent, and the replies too. Bank knew full well what they were doing. The manager's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, clearly eager to end this meeting. Look, Mr. Thompson, I'm not a lawyer. If you truly believe you have a case, you should consult with an attorney. But I must warn you, legal battles with institutions like ours can be very expensive and time-consuming. Thompson nodded slowly. Already talked to a lawyer. She's coming by tomorrow with the court papers. Thought I'd give you folks a chance to do right before things get messy. Jenkins stood up abruptly. I think we're done here. I'll walk you out. Don't you want to see the rest? Thompson asked, indicating his sack still half full of evidence. That won't be necessary. Our legal team will review anything that's formally submitted. Jenkins held the door open, his message clear, leave now. As Thompson slowly gathered his papers back into the sack, Jenkins added with a thin smile, no offense, sir, but we get all sorts of unusual claims. Last month, a woman insisted our vault was built on an ancient burial ground. Thompson tied his sack closed and looked the manager in the eye. Difference is, I can prove what I'm saying. Your fancy lawyers are gonna see that soon enough. Walking back through the main lobby, Thompson noticed how customers stepped aside, giving him strange looks. The security guard watched him more carefully now. Funny how an old man with some papers could suddenly seem threatening to a big, powerful bank. Outside in the sunshine, Thompson took a deep breath. Round 1 was exactly what he expected. But round 2, that would be different. He patted the sack gently. Don't you worry, he whispered to his precious documents. We'll get our day. The law office of Chen and Associates was nothing fancy, just 3 rooms above the hardware store downtown. The waiting area had mismatched chairs and magazines from last year, but the walls were lined with law books that looked well used. Mr. Thompson sat with his burlap sack in his lap, watching the clock tick past 9:30. He'd been here since opening time at 9, his appointment scheduled for 9:15. But he was used to waiting. His whole life had been waiting for this moment. Finally, the inner door opened. A young woman in a simple gray suit stepped out. She couldn't have been more than 35, with practical shoes and a no-nonsense haircut. Mr. Thompson, I'm Attorney Chen. Sorry to keep you waiting. No trouble, he replied, standing up with a small grunt. Been waiting 60 years. 15 more minutes don't make much difference. She showed him into a small office with stacks of files covering most surfaces. A half-empty coffee cup sat beside a computer that had seen better days. You mentioned on the phone that this concerns First National Bank, she asked, clearing some space on her desk. Thompson nodded, opening his sack. They're sitting on my family's land. Been ignoring us for decades. He expected skepticism, had seen it in every face when he tried to explain his case over the years. But Attorney Chen just nodded and pulled out a notepad. Start at the beginning, she said, and show me everything you've got. For the next 2 hours, they spread papers across her desk. Thompson explained how his grandfather, a cotton farmer, had leased part of his land to the original bank owners in 1923. Not sold, leased. The agreement had specific conditions about how the property could be used and payments that were supposed to continue. After Grandpa died, the bank stopped making payments. Daddy tried to fight it, but he didn't have the money for lawyers. Then he passed, and it fell to me. Attorney Chen held one document up to the light, examining the watermark. This is the original lease agreement, she said quietly. How did you preserve these so well? Kept them in a metal box under my bed. Some nights I take them out just to remind myself it wasn't all in my head. She jotted some notes. The bank has changed ownership several times. Did you ever receive formal notification of these changes? Thompson shook his head. Never heard nothing official, just saw the name on the building change every few years. That's interesting, she said, tapping her pen. Very interesting. For the next 3 weeks, Thompson didn't hear much from Attorney Chen. When he called, her secretary just said she was doing research. He tried not to get his hopes up. Others had promised to help before, only to back down once they realized who they were fighting against. Then one rainy Tuesday his phone rang. Mr. Thompson, I need you to come to the courthouse with me tomorrow. Bring your documents. You found something? He asked, heart suddenly pounding. I found everything, she replied. The bank made a massive mistake during their merger in 1957. They'd failed to properly transfer the conditional lease. It's right there in the county records. And there's more. When they renovated in '82, they violated the original agreement about preserving the facade. Thompson sank into his kitchen chair. So what does that mean? It means your family's reversion clause was triggered twice, and they never notified you as legally required. He could hear papers rustling on her end. I've spent days in the county archives, found records from bank board meetings where they actually discussed your father's claims and decided to ignore them, hoping the issue would resolve itself naturally, which I believe was their polite way of waiting for your family to die off. Thompson felt a strange mix of anger and vindication wash over him. All those years of being dismissed, of people looking at him like he was crazy or confused. So we got them, he asked, barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson, Attorney Chen said firmly, we don't just have them. We have them dead to rights. 6 weeks after his first visit, Mr. Thompson walked through the doors of First National Bank again. This time, he wore his Sunday suit, navy blue, a little shiny at the elbows, but clean and pressed. His burlap sack had been replaced by a proper leather briefcase that Attorney Chen had lent him. And this time, he didn't shuffle. He walked tall. The security guard did a double take. Morning, sir. Can I help you? I have an appointment with Mr. Jenkins, Thompson said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. The same receptionist from before looked up, recognition slowly dawning on her face. Oh, Mr. Thompson. Yes, Mr. Jenkins is expecting you. Conference room A, down the hall. Thompson nodded. Conference room A, not the small room from before, the big one where they met with important people. Attorney Chen was waiting for him in the lobby, dressed in a crisp suit with a stack of folders under her arm. Ready? She asked quietly. Ready as I'll ever be, he replied. The conference room had a long, polished table and leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the town. Mr. Jenkins was already there, along with 2 other men in expensive suits who Thompson didn't recognize. Mr. Thompson, Jenkins said, standing to shake hands. His smile seemed forced. And Attorney Chen, thank you for coming. This is our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Wilson, and our Head of Legal Affairs, Mr. Dawson. Thompson just nodded, taking a seat where Attorney Chen indicated. His throat felt suddenly dry. All those years of being ignored, and now these big shots were all staring at him like he was somebody. Jenkins cleared his throat. Before we begin, I want to say that the bank takes any claims about our property very seriously. But we've been operating at this location for over 90 years, and our legal standing is quite. I think we can skip the speeches, Attorney Chen interrupted, opening her briefcase. We're here to present evidence, not listen to corporate talking points. She began laying out documents on the table, some from Thompson's collection, others from her own research. As you can see in the original lease agreement of 1923, the Thompson family granted conditional use of this parcel with specific terms that would trigger a reversion of ownership. The bank's lawyer, Dawson, picked up one of the documents with a skeptical expression. These are very old claims. The statute of limitations doesn't apply when there's evidence of deliberate concealment. Attorney Chen finished for him, sliding another folder across the table. County Archive Records, File 83B minutes from your board meeting in September 1957, specifically discussing the Thompson family's claim and deciding, and I quote, not to pursue notification as required by Section 4 of the lease agreement. The room fell silent. Wilson picked up the folder with shaking hands, flipping through the pages. That's not all, Attorney Chen continued, her voice calm but firm. During your renovation in 1982, you deliberately altered the original facade, violating paragraph 7 of the agreement. And most damning of all, during your corporate restructuring in 1957, you failed to properly transfer the conditional lease to the new entity. Thompson watched the faces around the table change as they realized what they were dealing with. The smug confidence drained away, replaced by something closer to panic. "I'm worked in this building for 32 years, Thompson said quietly, speaking up for the first time. "Cleaning floors at night, emptying your trash cans, all while knowing this land belonged to my family." Jenkins swallowed hard. "Mr. Thompson, if what you're saying is true, and we'd need our team to verify these documents, why come forward now, after all these years?" Thompson looked him straight in the eye. "My grandson wants to go to college, needs money for tuition. Got me thinking about what's rightfully his, what should have been passed down through our family all these years." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a faded photograph of a dignified black man standing proudly in front of a farmhouse. "My grandfather worked this land from sunup to sundown, built something from nothing, then watched as it was taken piece by piece." He set the photo on the table. "I'm not leaving until things are set right." The bank's legal team requested a 1-hour break. Thompson and Attorney Chen waited in a small side room, neither saying much. Through the glass walls, they could see people rushing around, phones pressed to ears, papers being copied. "They're scrambling," Attorney Chen said, pouring Thompson a cup of water. "That's a good sign." When they returned to the conference room, there were twice as many bank representatives present. A woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair seemed to be in charge now. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Victoria Powell, Regional Director for First National. I flew in from the head office as soon as I heard about this meeting." Her voice was all business, but her eyes kept drifting to the documents spread across the table. "We've been reviewing your claims." Thompson just nodded, waiting. "What puzzles me," Powell continued, tapping her manicured fingernails on the table, "is why we haven't heard from you before now." Attorney Chen opened her mouth to respond, but Thompson held up his hand. This was something he needed to say himself. "Ma'am, I've been trying to get someone to listen for 15 years. Started sending letters back in 2009, after my father passed. Got form responses when I got any response at all." He reached into the briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside were dozens of letters, neatly organized by date. Each one was a polite request for the bank to acknowledge the lease agreement. Each response was a dismissal. "Called your customer service line at least 30 times. Even came in person 4 times before last month. Nobody would talk to me. One of your managers, don't recall his name, told me I was wasting everyone's time with ancient history." Powell's face tightened. She turned to Jenkins. "Is this true?" Jenkins tapped at his collar. "I don't know. That would have been before my time." "Check your records," Attorney Chen suggested. "April 12, 2011. October 30, 2013, February 2, 2017, and January 15, 2020. Each time, Mr. Thompson requested a meeting with management about a property matter. Each time, he was turned away." Thompson leaned forward. "Most folks don't know I used to work here. Started in 1986 as the night janitor. Worked my way up to head of building maintenance. Retired in 2018. A murmur went around the table. "You were an employee?" Powell asked, clearly shocked. 32 years. Knew every inch of this building. Never said nothing about my family's connection to it. Figured nobody would believe the janitor anyway." He smiled sadly. "Watched all you folks coming and going in your nice cars, making plans for expansion, celebrating record profits, all happening on land that should have been putting my kids through college." The room fell silent. "Why didn't you say something while you worked here?" asked one of the younger executives. Thompson looked at him like he was from another planet. "Son, use your head. Black man in his 60s, working as a janitor, telling bank executives they're sitting on stolen property. Who would have listened? Would have lost my job, and then what? Couldn't feed my family on righteousness alone." Powell cleared her throat. "Mr. Thompson, regardless of how we got here, we need to address the situation as it stands today. Our preliminary review suggests there may indeed be irregularities in how the property transfer was handled." "Irregularities?" Attorney Chen repeated with a slight edge. Is that what we're calling deliberate corporate theft now? Thompson placed a hand on her arm. Let's just hear what they have to say. Powell nodded, seeming to appreciate his calm. The documents you've provided are compelling. Particularly troubling are the board minutes from 1957. If authentic, and we'll need to verify that, they suggest a serious breach of ethics, possibly even legal violations. They're authentic, Thompson said quietly. Your own archives division keeps those records. Basement level, Section C, row 17. Used to dust those shelves every week. Never read them myself, just knew they were important enough to be kept under lock and key. Powell's eyebrows shot up. She scribbled something on a notepad and passed it to an assistant, who immediately left the room. Mr. Thompson, she said finally, I think we need to have a much longer conversation about this matter. For the next 3 days, Thompson barely slept. His phone rang constantly with calls from Attorney Chen, updating him on the bank's response. They'd assembled a team of their top lawyers from the city. They'd called in historians to examine the old deeds. They'd even hired private investigators to look into Thompson's background, hoping to find something, anything to discredit him. They found nothing. Just a hard-working man who'd raised 3 children, paid his taxes on time, and kept quiet about a massive injustice for decades. On Friday morning, Thompson's kitchen table became the unlikely setting for a high-stakes meeting. He'd refused to meet at the bank again. This is my home, he told Attorney Chen. Let them come to me for a change. And they did. Ms. Powell arrived in a town car, followed by 2 other vehicles carrying lawyers and assistants. They looked out of place in Thompson's modest neighborhood, where most houses needed fresh paint and many front yards had been turned into vegetable gardens. Thompson greeted them at the door wearing clean overalls and a pressed shirt. Coffee's in the pot, he said simply. Might be a bit strong for city folks. They gathered around his worn kitchen table, the same table where his children had done their homework, where his wife had served Sunday dinners before she passed 5 years ago. Attorney Chen sat beside him, a quiet, steady presence. Under the table, his hands shook slightly, but his voice remained calm. So what's it gonna be? He asked after they'd all settled in. Ms. Powell opened a leather portfolio. Mr. Thompson, after extensive review, we've confirmed the validity of your documents. The bank is prepared to offer a settlement. She slid a paper across the table. The number at the bottom had more zeros than Thompson had ever seen in his life. That's our offer to purchase the property outright and settle all claims, she explained. It's significantly above market value, and we'd structure it as a tax-advantaged transaction. Thompson looked at the number again. It was enough money to send his grandson to any college in the country. Enough to fix his leaky roof and buy a new car. Enough to never worry about money again. But he didn't reach for the paper. That all sounds real nice, he said slowly. But this ain't just about money. What else would you want? One of the lawyers asked, sounding genuinely confused. Thompson looked around at his kitchen, at the faded photos on his refrigerator showing 3 generations of his family. Justice ain't just about dollars and cents, it's about setting things right. He turned to Attorney Chen, who nodded encouragingly. I've been thinking about this for a long time, Thompson continued. Here's what I want. First, the bank acknowledges publicly what happened. No hiding behind fancy legal words. Just the truth, that my family's land was wrongfully taken. Ms. Powell's expression tightened, but she didn't interrupt. Second, I want part ownership of the bank itself, not just money, a stake in the business. My grandfather was a businessman too, before they took his land. Now the lawyers were whispering urgently to each other. One shook his head firmly. Third, Thompson pressed on. I want a foundation set up in my family's name. Something to help folks around here. College scholarships, small business loans, that sort of thing. He looked Ms. Powell directly in the eye. And lastly, I want the bank to change how it does business with regular folks. No more ignoring people because they look or talk a certain way. The room fell silent. One of the younger lawyers scribbled furiously on a notepad. Ms. Powell leaned back in her chair. Mr. Thompson, some of what you're asking for goes beyond a typical legal settlement. The board would never. The board better think real careful, Thompson cut in. Attorney Chen here has been talking to some newspaper folks. They seem mighty interested in how a major bank ignored a black family's rightful claim for all these years, especially since I got proof your people knew about it back in '57. That stopped everyone cold. In the silence that followed, the old clock on Thompson's wall ticked loudly. "Let me be clear," Thompson added. "I don't want to destroy the bank. Too many good people work there. Just want what's fair." Ms. Powell closed her portfolio slowly. "We'll need time to consider these terms." "Take all the time you need," Thompson replied, pouring himself another cup of coffee. "I've waited 60 years. I can wait a bit longer." After they left, Attorney Chen stayed behind. "That was something else," she said admiringly. "You really threw them for a loop." Thompson smiled, looking out his kitchen window at the children playing in the street. "My daddy always said, don't just ask for a slice when the whole pie is rightfully yours." For the first time in decades, he felt like his father would be proud. 2 years passed. The morning sun peeked through the clouds as Mr. Thompson walked down Main Street, nodding to folks who greeted him by name. Some still did a double take when they saw him. It wasn't every day you saw an 85-year-old man in worn overalls heading into a bank's board meeting. The sign above the door no longer read First National Bank. Now it said Thompson Community Bank, with a small image of a cotton plant beside the name. Thompson ran his fingers over the letters as he pushed through the glass doors. He still couldn't quite believe it sometimes. "Morning," Mr. Thompson called the security guard, the same man who had once watched him suspiciously. "Boardroom's all set up for you." Thompson nodded. "Thanks, Joe. How's that boy of yours doing at college?" "Making the dean's list. That scholarship from your foundation made all the difference." Inside, the bank had changed. The cold marble and steel were still there, but now the walls displayed photographs of local history, including one prominent image of Thompson's grandfather standing proudly in front of his farm in 1919. Beside it hung Thompson's old burlap sack, preserved in a glass case with a small plaque explaining its significance. Thompson took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. His knees weren't what they used to be, though he still refused the fancy cane the other board members had given him last Christmas. In the boardroom, people were already gathering, bank executives in suits, but also ordinary townspeople. The board now included not just financial experts, but also a local teacher, a small business owner, and a retired nurse. "We're ready whenever you are, Mr. Thompson," said the new bank president, a younger man who'd been brought in after the settlement. He had a way of actually listening when people talked, which Thompson appreciated. "Let's get started then," Thompson said, easing into his chair at the head of the table. The meeting began with reports from the Thompson Foundation. In 2 years, they'd provided college scholarships to 43 students from low-income families. They'd helped 7 small businesses get off the ground with low-interest loans. They'd funded repairs for the community center and started a program teaching financial literacy in high schools. "Next item," said the president, "is the new lending program for first-time homebuyers." This was Thompson's favorite part. The bank had completely overhauled how they evaluated loan applications, focusing less on credit scores and more on steady employment and community ties. People who would have been rejected before were now becoming homeowners. "How many families approved this month?" Thompson asked. 17 came the answer, including the Wilsons, who've been renting that place on Oak Street for 15 years. Thompson smiled. The Wilson's son played baseball with his grandson. After the meeting, Thompson didn't head straight home. Instead, he walked to the small park behind the bank where concrete had been replaced with grass and trees. A group of kids played while parents watched from benches. One little girl waved at him, and he waved back. He found his usual bench and sat down heavily, feeling his age in his bones. From his pocket, he pulled out a wrinkled photograph, his grandfather, father, and himself as a young boy, standing in front of a cotton field that was now the town center. "We did it," he whispered to their faces. "Took a while, but we got there." Later that afternoon, his grandson picked him up in a sensible used car. Thompson had insisted he didn't need anything fancy, despite the settlement money. "How was the meeting, Grandpa?" the young man asked, carefully helping Thompson with his seatbelt. "Same as always. A lot of talk about money." Thompson looked out the window as they drove past the bank. "You know, when this all started, I just wanted what was owed to us. Never expected all this." His grandson grinned. "You changed the whole town, Grandpa." Thompson shook his head. Just set things right is all. But he couldn't help smiling too. As they pulled away, the golden letters of Thompson Community Bank caught the afternoon sun. Not bad, he thought, for an old man with a sack of papers that nobody wanted to read.